Hey guys, my name is Andrew Bauman, and thank you for having me to your event. Sorry I could not be there in person, but I did just want to say I'm honored to speak with you today. Um, I used to be a pastor years ago before I became a therapist, and so I know that world. That's who I work with. My wife and I run the Christian Counseling Center for Sexual Health and Trauma, and I want to talk a little bit today about pornography. I know it's a bit of a taboo subject and not super normalized in society, in the church, and yet some of the statistics say up to 80% of men. I think it's 20, high 20 something percent of women use. Even 50% of pastors have some type of history with pornography. This is a big deal. And it was a big deal in my own life as well, that literally led me to the brink of death. And I want to tell you that story. So I grew up right on that time where the internet was becoming a thing. Also, purity culture, the church telling me sex was bad, not to have it, whatever, you know, fine. But they didn't tell me anything else. There was no other words, no other language around sexuality, around, yeah, what was bad? What was sex sounded great, right? Like, and yet don't do it until until you're married was the only language that they put around my life. And then pornography, as I said, became a thing on the internet as I was growing up. And so this young impressionable boy who wanted to do well, wanted to do right, I began to slowly view pornography more and more and more, and realizing before I knew it, I wasn't trapped. Before I realized that I was stuck, addicted, similar to a drug, where I felt like I could not, um, I couldn't function without it. And I needed it. So for the next 13 years of my life, I consumed pornography, sometimes more than others, on and off. And again, continued to go to church, continued to actually study the Bible, college, becoming a pastor, serving at a few different churches, and still having a secret life, right? Still having this compartmentalized view of self, where though I know I didn't want to be that man, I was slowly becoming that man. Um, this developed in me what I call a pornographic style of relating. I began to relate to the world pornographically, and I didn't know how to have real relationship. And so in my early 20s, as I began to try to have more serious relationships, realizing how much I had to learn, because porn had taught me that women were objects, that I was in control, rather than a mutual healthy relationship where they were shared power, shared desire. Pornography taught me to be selfish with my desire. It taught me quickness, right? Like trying to get my needs met very quick, because that's what porn taught me. Rather than actually shared intimacy is a long process that two people can co-create together. Porn messed up nearly everything in my life. So I'm in college, um, trying, continuing to use, flunking out of college, right? What is going on inside of me was pain, because behind the pornography use, there's always something else going on, right? So for me, it was my own unprocessed wounds of my own sexual abuse. It was the divorce of my parents that I had never dealt with, an absent father, a numb mother who was not emotionally available because of her own hurts for my father. And so these issues were going on beneath the surface. And though I was going to church multiple times a week, I was not dealing with what was beneath the surface. Right. So it was coming out sideways. For other people, it can come out in other types of addictions. For me, pornography, the objectification of women was my drug of choice. And yet it didn't make me bad, but it did make me broken. Right. It did make me longing for healing, longing for something to soothe. And though I prayed to God so many times to help soothe, um, the the drug did not go away until, right, years later. And this is the dramatic part of my story, where I ended up about 20 years ago in the psychiatric ward, nearly taking my own life. Now, could I say it's because of porn? No, porn was a symptom, right, of all these other heartaches that were going on that I would not address. I was scared to address, right? I was running as fast as I could, similar to the story of the prodigal, my favorite story in the Bible, running away, trying desperately to fill my life, to run away from pain. Um, and and it never worked, obviously, because it never does. Our pain always catches up to us, no matter what, right? And so when I lost it all, when I literally was stripped of my clothes in a padded room, just like you see in the movies in the psychiatric ward, I read this quote, and I'll never forget it. So I forget it. I need a second to think about it. I read this: do not find out what the world needs. Find out what makes you come alive. Go and do that, because what the world needs is for people to come alive. And it struck me so much. I had lost my way. I had lost my heart. What made me come alive, right? For me, it was writing, it was sports, competing, it was leading people. I love to lead people, right? And realizing that God, this is not just some pop psychology, but like God wants me to come alive. The glory of God is man fully alive. Was it Saint Irenaeus? So one of those old school saints said that, right? The glory of God is man fully alive, and God is in me, right? God wants life abundantly in me. And pornography addiction stole that from me, right? It took away my life. So I'm in the psych ward. I read that quote and I begin to make a list. Here's the things that make me come alive. Here's the things. Here's how I can begin to reclaim my lost heart. And so I began to do that. I began to follow that. I began to follow the voice of God inside of me, and began to put the pieces back together in my life. And slowly, as I began to deal with my story, as I began to go into therapy and finding a mentor who began to father me and lead me more fully into my own story and to the story of God as the co-author of my life, the porn slowly became less and less and less until I outgrew it, until it was no longer, I no longer needed it, right? I no longer needed it to numb my pain because I had faced my pain. And that's my hope to you guys as spiritual leaders in this community. Will you, twofold, will you, one, face your own pain in your own life, your own hidden life, any secrets? And then also, will you begin to talk about it? Will you begin to be open with your story, your pain, right? God and our spirituality is not separate from our life. It's not separate from our story. God lives in us. And that is a beautiful invitation to know heaven now, right? To know God in us, the Imago Dei, the image bearer, right? And that's one thing as far as pornography, like knowing that these images on the screen, like he, whoever it is an image bearer of God. What does it mean to begin to honor instead of devour, right? And that's what porn taught me, how to devour image bearers of God rather than to truly delight in the beauty that God created, right? And that's the new work. That's the work moving forward. And as you guys lead your communities, the hope is that we can begin to be more honest. That yes, this pornography norm, this epidemic, leads to the objectification of women, which leads to sex trafficking, which leads to issues of domestic violence and violence against women. This is a big deal, right? It's a big deal in the church, and we can't just gloss over the crucifixion and get to the resurrection. That's not the Christian story that I know, right? For us to be honest, we have to enter into the crucifixion to experience the resurrection. We have to follow in the footsteps of Christ. We have to enter the crucifixion before we enter the resurrection, before we taste the goodness of the resurrection. That's the invitation, right? And you guys are doing such fabulous work up there. I love what you were doing, advocating for women, but also advocating for men, to say this is not just a woman's issue, right? This is an issue of demand, right? So many men are buying sex, using sex to numb their pain, and we have to address the men that are in the demand, on the demand side, that are buying sex, that are using women as means to an end, rather than honoring the God in them, right? And that is my hope for our church, that we can create safe spaces, safe, equitable spaces for our church, that we can be honest, right? I remember a quote by theologian Walter Brueggemann, who says, churches should not be the happiest places in town, right? But they should be the most honest. They should be the most authentic. That is our goal, right? Because God is truth. So the more we live in truth, the more we tell the truth, the more we experience God, the more God shines through when we live in truth, when we tell the truth, right? So therefore, that's where pornography, telling the truth about pornography, telling the truth about our own stories of pain, that all can lead us to know God more fully, right? That is the goal. And that is the goal for both personally, right? Because we can only lead others as far as we've gone ourselves, right? So you personally, knowing your own story, knowing your own woundedness, knowing your own depravity, so you can step out and lead those who are in your congregation, those who follow you, those who trust you, so you can lead from a deep place and begin to offer liberation that we so long for. Thank you so much for having me. You guys are awesome. Keep up the great work. I look forward to hearing amazing stories of the bold work you guys are doing to help set people free. Peace. Thank you.